The live stream is started now, Chairman.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to start by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting through the Council's YouTube page. As you will be aware, we are meeting virtually in line with the government's guidance. Members, please could you keep your video cameras switched on at all times with your microphone muted, and when you wish to speak, obviously demute and say what you have and indicate what you wish to speak and raise your hand. I'll start that again. Members, please could you keep your video cameras switched on at all times with your microphone muted except when you are invited to speak, and you can indicate you wish to speak by raising your virtual hand. When I invite you to speak, please unmute your microphone, make your comment or question, and then mute yourself again. Should we encounter any technical problems, I may adjourn the meeting while this is addressed. If your connection fails during the meeting and you are unable to reconnect, one of the Democratic Services team will contact you. Finally, I would remind all members that this is a virtual meeting and they are recorded. So, thank you, Ms. Derby. Could you please do the roll call?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so Councillor Holditch, can you just confirm you're here? Councillor Holditch, sorry, could you just confirm that you're here? You're on mute.
Yeah, I didn't mute myself though. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Yes, I'm present and correct, Pippa. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
In attendance.
Thank you. Councillor Ayres.
I'm present.
Councillor Sereste.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Farouk.
Present, Pippa.
Thank you. Councillor Hiller.
Yes, I'm here, Pippa.
Thank you. Councillor Seaton.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walsh.
Yes, I'm here, Pippa. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Bashir.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. That's everyone present, Chair.
Okay, fine. Can Ms. Derby, can you confirm there are no absentees, please?
Thank you, Chair. There are no apologies for absence from members. We have apologies from Sue Grace as Director.
Okay. Declarations of interest, members? I don't see anybody wishing to declare one. Okay.
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay. Now we have to approve 3 sets of minutes. I will take them all individually. 14th of September, shareholders cabinet meeting. Is it your wish they are a true record?
Happy to propose.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Okay, that's all in favour? I don't see anybody objecting. Thank you very much. 21st of September cabinet. We've been asked to approve the minutes for this meeting set out. Can I have a mover
Happy
for
to
those?
propose. Yep, happy to.
Happy to second, John.
Happy to second.
Okay. Do I have any objections? No. Thank you very much. 26th of October, budget cabinet. Being asked to approve these meetings.
Happy to propose.
Seconder, please.
Happy to second, Leader.
All right. I don't see anybody opposing those or wish for alteration. No. Thank you very much. You're happy with that, Pippa? Nobody is objecting?
Yep, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Petitions presented to Cabinet. I don't believe we have any. Is that correct?
No, none have been received, Chairman.
Okay. We're going to... I think one of the two people have wondered what the title of this next item is. It's Child Yield. And we're going over to Councillor Ayres to introduce the item, please.
Thank you, Leader. Since 2018, the 0 to 19 Education Place Planning Service has been working with the Business Intelligence Service to replicate for Peterborough the same set of forecasting and place planning tools which are integral to the place planning strategies used in Cambridgeshire. Reviewing the child yield multipliers is the final element of this work. The child yield multipliers are an important tool in the planning of the provision of new and expanding communities. They're used to forecast the numbers of children for a given number of homes, new homes, accounting for development size, number of bedrooms, and tenure type. So that is what that word child yield multiplier actually means. I need to point out straight away, please, that in paragraph 412, there is a reference to affordable homes. And I want you to know that this includes intermediate tenures and social housing, whereas in paragraph 420, this refers specifically to social rents. That's important, as you'll hear, I'm sure, from Mike Soper. Developers are required to mitigate the impact of their developments on local services, including education. It is therefore essential that where new educational infrastructure can be funded externally, for example, via Section 106 developer contributions, officers can evidence robustly to planners and developers the council's requirements, and so maximise the funding from this source and avoid the risk of education capital projects being underfunded. Like all forecasting tools, child yield multipliers need to be up to date and credible. They need to reflect accurately the local situation for Peterborough in terms of the numbers of children arriving on new housing developments. Forecasting the number of children who will live in a new development is complex. Officers in the Business Intelligence Service have over many years developed a methodology through which the multipliers are devised. This methodology is based on 3 items. First, the analyses of census data and NHS 0 to 4 years data. Secondly, an analysis of schools data for past new developments. And thirdly, surveys of new local developments. And with regard to the surveys, these were sent out 3 times by 3 post response envelopes, and they were included as routine to maximise the opportunities for residents to respond. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, it wasn't possible to undertake sample door knocking, as was usually have been done had there not been a pandemic. We're hopeful that in the future that will resume, of course. So Mike Soper, the research team manager from the Business Intelligence Service, who led the work on the multipliers and is co-author of the report before you, is here to answer the questions in detail. So perhaps I could hand over to Mike to make some comments as well.
Mr. Soper, sounds very wonderful, doesn't it? Sounds as if you're a member of MI5.
No, not really. The thing about the child yield multipliers, Councillor Ayres has said, it's one of those elements of local government that if you get it right and you get your forecasts of number of children arriving on new developments right and negotiate with the developers the suitable amount of education provision, then nobody notices because we've met our statutory duty and there's sufficient places for the children to go to school. If you get it wrong, then there's insufficient places and it creates news headlines and it creates a lot of fuss and stress and headaches for the local authorities. So it's one of those things that we manage behind the scenes to make sure that the local community has sufficient education places. What we've done really, as Councillor has said, is that completed the technical work to work out what the multipliers should be that we use within our negotiations with developers and that we use with the DFE in terms of demonstrating basic need as well. So I can answer questions on the technical side of how did you get number X or Y about the survey or the process, and my colleague Claire obviously leads the place planning team, can talk about the policy in terms of, well, what do these numbers mean in terms of education policy. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Soper. Councillor Allen?
Yeah, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Mr. Soper, and thank you, Councillor Ayres. I think
I'd just like further clarification. In your intro, you referred to 4.20 regarding socially rented properties. Now, I'd like to just drill down on that. It's social rent to one side and everything else conflated, i.e. rent to buy, shared ownership, market rent. Can you just give me a further clarification on how you delineate that, please?
I
I'll
think actually, Mike, is better to explain those things to you, actually, Councillor Allen, and also probably Claire Buckingham as well. So I'll leave it to them to explain that because it is quite technical.
Thank you. Yeah, the main thing for us to be able to do is discern the social rented housing from the remainder of the other forms of housing that are provided, because the social rented housing generates a much more or many more children and creates higher pressure in terms of school places compared to the other tenures. You're right, though, there are increasing number. So there's more market housing. And when we use the term market housing, we mean people buying housing with a mortgage. There's a lot of intermediate types now. There's shared ownership. There, you can put the mayor's 10K home. No, sorry, mayor's 100K home. 100K home in there, and any number of other sort of intermediate tenures in the middle. They tend to work more like market housing in terms of the numbers of children generated from those type of tenures. So for us, the most important differentiation is social rent. I rented from the local authority or rented from housing association, and the rest. I hope that clarifies in terms of where the important difference in policy and numbers lies.
Yeah, thank you for a very succinct answer. Thank you so much. That just clarified for me. Thank you.
I have to say that was well put. Councillor Seresti.
Thank you, Leader. Does anybody know why child yield from social housing is so much higher than for market housing?
Yes, the general reason being that the social housing is allocated on a needs basis, so that need has to be expressed, and generally speaking, there's no sort of concept of a spare room within social housing. So if I was buying a house with a mortgage, I tend to go and buy as much as I can afford, and that might include a spare room for the home office or anything else like that. That concept doesn't really apply within the social housing market. You generally try and fit the family size to the unit. So if there is a 3-bed property, that tends to have family, a 3-bed social rent property that will have adults there, and also both bedrooms will be utilised for children, maybe 2 sharing 1 bedroom and another in another. So a 3-bedroom property will yield 3 children in terms of provision for education. Whereas within market housing, people tend to retain or afford, try and go for as much spare space as they can. So there is just a better fit or tighter fit between family size and bedrooms in the social rent sector.
Skillfully put, Mike. Councillor Seaton.
Thank you, Leader. This issue is quite close to my heart. I actually became a councillor in Hampton. One of the reasons was that there just weren't places for local children, as I felt there should be. And I wonder whether the assumptions we've got in this would pick up the issues that we had in Hampton. I was told in the past that the assumptions did not allow for the birth rate that we were seeing in Hampton.
Correct.
Will this new set of assumptions pick that sort of thing up? Because, people want assurance they can get local places for local children. Thank you, Leader.
Mike?
Yeah, so what we've seen with these is we are increasing considerably the yield that we're saying. So we are indeed, unfortunately, as you've observed, in some ways we're looking back So we're looking back at the new developments that have been built in Hampton, Stanground, Paston, and we are saying, well, these are the yields, and these yields are much, much higher than our previous assumptions. I think it might be better if Claire also commented on this in terms of the change in policy, in terms of how the new yields multipliers will influence how her team negotiates the places for education. You're right, Claire, to do that.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah. So obviously, as Mike said, we're looking back to a large degree. There've been a lot of developments up to this point in Peterborough. But the next one that probably will come along where we will therefore be able to apply these new multipliers is probably going to be the showground development. So when if we get to the point of negotiating there for the funding, the developer contributions that we will need to respond to the impact of that development, so to cater for all the children coming out of it, we will be going into those negotiations with up-to-date multipliers, which we will be able to, we can evidence and say, this is why we're negotiating on this basis. So that will obviously maximise the position for the council to ensure that we get the right level of funding from the developer to ensure that any children coming out of that next new development, there will be sufficient school places for them.
Thank you, Claire. You said all that without your mouth moving.
Oh,
because your picture froze. There you go. That was very clever. Right, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, John. Mike, just a small point, because the documents are public in Appendix 1. If you were reading this as a member of the public, you might be confused by the references to county council. I think perhaps, don't worry, I just wanted to make, so you could alert everybody that it's a joint team. You're working across both councils. So for those reading county council in the appendix, it should actually just say council. But those eagle-eyed, that's all. So it's not to embarrass you, it's just really to put the record straight if anybody reads that. But I would like to ask you, why are there fewer children with an EHCP plan, education and healthcare plan, in a new development than in settled developments? I have my own views, but we could swap notes perhaps, but I'd like your view because you're the professional.
Yes, sorry about the county council reference. Amanda will tell you I've just racked up 25 years working for Cambridgeshire County Council, or working for the county council. So old habits die hard, as it were. Because yeah, you're right. We are working now as a team across both local authorities. So apologies for that reference. In terms of the EHCPs, it's an interesting question, and what I'm coming on to is more speculation than facts, if you see what I mean, or what I'm drawing from the facts. There's an element of EHCP into all education, health and healthcare plans, the plans to support children with additional needs or special educational needs, as we used to talk about. There's an element of that child need that's driven by deprivation and disadvantage. For example, it may be linked to sort of poor maternal nutrition. Some sort of elements of that need is then expressed when the child is given birth, for example. So it's related to deprivation and disadvantage, and some of the newer communities, particularly where they're at least sort of 70-80% market homes bought with a mortgage, generally aren't as deprived as some of our more established communities across the rest of Peterborough. So with the EHCP need tends to be just that little bit lower, more in line with the national average actually than the figure we see across Peterborough. That is one particular element. The one thing we do see though is within the social housing is an element of that social housing is being provided for families with a need, and that need might be that they have a child with often severe disabilities or need, and move to more specialist form of housing. But overall, the rate is lower. Yes, I would put it down to a difference in deprivation, disadvantage, and background, social factors.
Maybe
I'd be interested in.
maybe I could apply for a job, because that was my number one as well. Deprivation seemed to be the key in terms of my thought process. As you say, it's complex, but thank you for that explanation.
Councillor Farouk.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mike, and thank you for a very good report. And you know, as a councillor who comes from Hampton, and as Councillor Seaton alluded to, and Councillor Suresti would agree, this report couldn't come soon enough for us. You know, with an old multiplier where the primary school places were 20 to 30, and now new ones proposing at 35 to 45, this will really help us mitigate some of the issues we've been facing over the last few years. We've been sort of, as you're aware, we've been sort of playing the chase-up game where more porter cabins were appearing at our primary schools and extra classes were introduced just to accommodate those children. Not that we didn't, we managed to do it, so brilliant. So this report couldn't come soon enough for us. One, I know you based your report on 3 elements, but I was wondering if you wanted to introduce a 4th element to assess this, and 4th element would be quality of education. You know, when I used to run a restaurant and people used to come and have a drink with me, they used to say the reason they moved to Hampton was quality of education. So maybe when the new school appears and the quality of education is good, a lot of parents move into those areas basis on that. So even if I have 3 kids, I'll squeeze into 2-bedroom house just to get in that. So I wonder if you consider that. That's part A of my question. And the part B of my question is, are you also intending to carry out similar surveys in other regenerated areas? For instance, in the city centre now, for instance, more housing is appearing, or more housing appearing on Lincoln Road or other central areas. Are you intending to carry out similar in those areas as well? Thank you. Sorry for 2 questions.
Who's taking that, Mike?
I'll. The first one, I think Claire and I need to do as a double team. Can I talk about the second one first, if that's okay? In terms of, you're right, we've identified, talking with Councillor Ayres, there is a gap in our understanding potentially of, or not gap, it's our understanding is out of date in terms of how many children may be moving into regenerated areas towards the city centre, particularly how many children are potentially going to be generated by 1-2-bedroom flats. Normally, we would say very few, but we need to check and test that assumption. So we've already highlighted, and Claire's already requested, that I do some additional field work to identify what's happening, particularly given the extent of regeneration around Peterborough Centre that we're likely to see, even if you know the sort of some of the work that the City Council is directly involved in. So I think it's a gap in our knowledge in terms of the pupils generated from regeneration. The earlier one about quality of education is interesting insofar as we're seeing an element of higher demand for secondary school places, potentially in some Peterborough new developments where parents seem to be moving for get their children into better, perceived as better secondary schools. So there's a slightly higher ratio of secondary school children moving around the city moving out of the city into these new developments than would otherwise be the case that I've seen in other places across the rest of Cambridgeshire, for example. So that movement just seems to be slightly higher. What I need, though, to confirm that is to finish and analysing the results, the rest of the content of that new development survey. What we've done is take the child multiplier analysis out of the new development survey and look at that first, because of, as you say, the pressing need of getting that piece of work done. The rest of the new survey analysis has been shoved on the back burner while I've been lending my team out to do COVID-based work. We will come through and report on the rest of the survey in January, though. Just so we can see, because one thing that does tell us is where people are moving to and from, the extent to which our new developments are attracting people to move around the city versus coming in entirely from elsewhere in the region, elsewhere in the UK as well. Claire, do you want to come in on the quality of education?
I think this partly relates to section 4.7 in the report, not the appendix, the main report. Where we listed the fact that there are a number of intangibles, things that are to some degree out of our control in terms of predicting them, and the rate, the buoyancy of the housing market, for example, that sort of thing. And parental preference moving, to a particular school based on popularity, various factors are very hard to quantify. And as Lynn said in her introduction, obviously this has to be based on, tangibles, evidence, facts. And also, of course, popularities of school can change. They can change quite swiftly. A poorer Ofsted report can, change the popularity of a school overnight, which wouldn't necessarily, be able to be captured in terms of the background elements that we need to look at for devising the multipliers. So I think it's that, that intangible element of parental preference. But I suppose what it does underline, very significantly for all of us, that question, and that is that obviously we always strive to be at a point where all our schools are good, and therefore, everybody will have a good local school, and to some degree that will, therefore mean that movement, that peak of popularity at one time that may dip off at another, and maybe cause shorter term, medium term problems with children getting places. That is obviously one way of mitting against that more intangible element of parental preference.
Thank you. Councillor Walsh.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Just a question about Claire and Michael both referred to looking back on what happened in the past to inform the future with this new formula. And I was just wondering, is there any scope for renegotiating contracts with developers based on new data coming in? Or is there a certain date, that's it, fixed, absolutely no way of changing things? Because the surveys, for instance, that couldn't be done during COVID, should that information come forward, I guess you would have a deadline whereby whatever you got after that, it's too late to feed into the process. So that's one question. And the other is just a kind of a general thing. The word mitigate that's used, schools are built to mitigate development, roads are built to mitigate development. Mitigate just seems to be a rather negative word. Is that just common parlance in the trade? Or, is there any scope for changing that? Because I would have thought that development ought to be seen as positive and schools being built around that to be a positive thing, rather than, it's sort of harmful houses going up and what could we do to mitigate them? If you see what I mean, it's just a sort of negative connotation, but it may be that is,
I'm afraid I think that's planning speak, unfortunately, developer speak, part of legislative wording as well. I'm afraid we sort of use in that context. But we can certainly, maybe perhaps more from my perspective, because I'm not a planner as such. We can all try and be mindful of using vocabulary that is maybe sounds more positive, that making enough education provision to provide for the children who come and live, who come onto new developments. So it's probably laziness, maybe a bit on our part.
It's definitely planning. I used to work as a planner. But don't hold that. And sorry, I'm not going to be. Sorry, Steve. I'll stop talking about. But I used to work in strategic planning. Mitigation is just the word you put around. And when I was a student, for example, you even use the word mitigate and think, well, imagine there's going to be a factory and how do you mitigate through the planning process? So that's where the word certainly comes from. What we've seen within previous new development surveys, though, you're right, is people saying that the process of moving on to a new development has been entirely positive in terms of their health, in terms of a whole range of other factors, and it's seen as being a positive experience. So I think you're right to take that on board. The other element of your question, though, could you just remind me what that was? There was one extra bit that we missed.
Is there any scope for renegotiation based on new data coming forward, and if so, at what point?
Do you want me to pick that up?
I think Claire could pick that one up, because otherwise we'll miss it, Claire.
Unfortunately, there is usually very little scope. Obviously, you know, we do the best we can, but there, I mean, it would require you know, variations to be made to parts of the Section 106 negotiations, and planners, understandably, you know, are very reluctant to get into that type of area, because obviously master planning is done at such an early stage that it is very hard. I suppose, I mean, one thing that is useful, I'm thinking, for example, you know, Great Haddon, the Section 106 negotiation for that was negotiated a very long time ago. And of course, you know, the multipliers were different then. But it will help us in terms of looking at, you know, the new schools, you know, when they need to come forward. It'll help us with that sort of minutiae. And working with the developers on that. But in terms of more funding coming through, you know, as a result of this sort of information coming later, that is, you know, that really doesn't happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay, understandable. I thought I'd just give it a try.
Okay. But I think also that it's important to point out that it's in the paper that because of how important these tools are, that we look to formally review them every 3 years, and I think now we're going to get that cycle much more rigorously than has been possible in the past for Peterborough, and therefore, you know, by doing that, you know, the time lags are never going to be too great, and certainly less great than they have been in the last period since they were last reviewed. So that's a positive, and that will be part of our formal work with the Business Intelligence Service. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really important. That's good news. Thank you.
Officer Cox.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's just to come back on the ability to renegotiate a 106. It is unlikely, especially if it's going to cost the developer more money. There is a mechanism for doing it through a deed of modification within 5 years of the obligation being initially agreed, but it has to be agreed by both partners. So it's possible, but unlikely, notwithstanding the fresh evidence that might have come forward. And just to re-emphasise Mike Soper's point, mitigation is a bit of a procedural word. Creating community facilities, education facilities within a new development creates a high quality development, and you're quite right, it should be seen in a very positive light rather than as a sort of procedural light.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Seaton, is it a new question?
Yes, it is, Leader. It's interesting to think that development is positive. I'm sure you'll sell that to the people in Caston next time that comes up. Haddon was just mentioned, and it was mentioned it was a long time ago. But at the time 106 was negotiated for Haddon, and I remember it, we knew all about the multiplier issues in Hampton. And so I certainly hope that what we're looking at now has been taken into account in that 106. Because it was the 106 for Hampton that caused us a lot of problems with school places. I wouldn't expect to have the same issues in Haddon, knowing what we knew when that was negotiated. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. I will add to the Hampton, because I did the Hampton 106, and it was challenged. The developers took the county council at that time to government, because we were asking for stuff that was not commercially viable. Several things happened in Hampton. It was done on a multiplier of how many children that you have per 100 dwellings. Well, that turned out to be nearly double that in Hampton. I think there was something in the water where the birth rate was extremely high, and whatever. And there was also some clever manipulation of the planning rules in there, because they didn't have to provide schools until they got to 4,000 houses, and then they came out with different planning applications in different areas, and it was complicated by Mr. Whatever his name is, the Deputy Prime Minister, up in the densities as well in Hampton. So there are a lot of reasons why Hampton didn't come up, but it's 25 years since that 106, and I do hope we've learned something from that. And also, you've got a huge amount of development already got planning permission and 106. Take Haddon, for instance. There's 7,000 houses out there. The 106, as I understand, is set it. And what I would ask you is, we have tremendous amount of problem, and I think Peter Hiller would probably agree with this, of getting developers to get up to the 30% of affordable housing. If you then, by having 30% of affordable housing, put a further burden on the developer for extra money into schools and so on, then are you going to curtail development? Are you going to curtail the amount of affordable housing that a developer can afford to put on? Because you're not in control of that. If you want to produce a planning application like that and it's financially burdensome, they just go to government and the government will say, yeah, it isn't financially viable. I think there's also a misapprehension around that the developers provide all the schools, but just tend to provide the land for the schools. And that was another problem in Hampton. The schools were built for whatever form of entry it was, 1, 2, whatever, with no land around it to allow us to expand. And we did increase every school, but where we could on the land that we had, and indeed we produced some other schools on land at our own cost because of the fact that there's so many numbers gone up there outside of 106. So are you going to hamper development with this? And where have you done some analysis? I think it's 43% of all 106 goes to education on these developments. Have you done some analysis on how much money you'll get out of the developer with this scheme compared with the one we've already got?
Yeah, I'll comment on that bit about as you increase the demand for what is social rent housing. So a lot of the planning policies now are looking for higher percentages of affordable, and then you can split the affordable out between the intermediate tenures, which don't seem to generate, which generates numbers of children alongside market, and then it's the social housing element, it's that block of social housing that then really pushes up the need. So developments with approximately 20% social housing, for example, will be asking the developer for social housing, affordable housing contribution, and at the same time the education contribution will go up alongside it. So you're right, there is this issue of viability, affordability for the developer as we push both those buttons at the same time, if you see what I mean, because they're linked to each other. If you push the affordable housing button, you're inevitably increasing the demand for education as well. In terms of the DFE, I just want to say that where, if the DFE sort of take that judgment and saying, well, actually, there's only a limit to how much you can take for education from not DFE. If the government say there's only a limit to what you can take for education from the developer, that ends up costing the DFE more through our basic needs formulas, because then behind the scenes my team are working with Claire to do these annual returns, which demonstrate our unmet basic need for education places, which again is us vying for grant money from the DFE alongside all the other local authorities as well. So if you like, the Ministry of Housing and Local Government saying, right, don't charge developers too much, ends up costing a DFE a bit more money as well. So it is a complex system, and there is I think Claire can come in and comment certainly in terms of the negotiations that we get involved with, particularly in the slightly different dynamic in Cambridgeshire, where you got the county council and the district council, and then there's an even more dynamic about the negotiations that are going on in that point. It is a challenging area, though, isn't it?
I mean, certainly, if we were negotiating new developer funding agreements going forward, I mean, our approach in Cambridgeshire is that we provide the evidence whereby if we think there's going to be any possibility that we are going to need to have the flexibility to expand, then we would negotiate hard for the land to enable us to do that, and the funding to enable us to, you know, to expand and to make schools bigger. So building a secondary school or primary, you know, in phases, but having negotiated so that we've got the land to expand it when we need it further down the line. That's certainly our negotiating approach. You know, as long as we've got the evidence to do it, that's the approach that we take, and you know, are fairly successful in that, I would say. Obviously, we've I and my team, and I suppose that there may have been different approaches in the past. I mean, obviously, we've got a joint service now working back across both authorities, and as Lynn explained at the beginning, in terms of the tools and the, you know, what's available to us to get the best possible outcomes. You know, we've got the full set now going forward, and we would employ, you know, all the sorts of strategies that we've been using for many years now in terms of negotiations that we've made in Cambridgeshire for education infrastructure.
I take it from what you've both said that you haven't done the analysis of how much you would get now to how much you get on your new scheme.
No, sorry, no, that was one of your sub questions. No.
So you could end up with less money.
I mean, we will be doing that. We know once we've got these new approvals, we will be, for example, the Great Haddon one coming up next. We will be looking at applying those, to that particular scenario. Yeah. So yes, we plan to do that.
Once the land's been bought at a price on old planning rules, you'll have a job to get people to go in with it. Anyway, okay.
Well, then I think what we have to look at is clever design. With our capital education projects, you know, making sure that we can make enough provision.
Okay, that's a stock answer if I heard one, lady. I accept that. Okay, right. We don't have any revised recommendations. So are you happy to approve the recommendations as set out in your report? Do I have a mover, please? Councillor Ayres, I'll take it you will move it.
Happy to second, Chair.
I thought I'd spoken. But you obviously couldn't hear me. But never mind.
Okay. Well, you probably weren't switched on. Okay. Did you want to say anything before we go to the vote?
No, nothing other than really to say, I think everybody's gathered from this that it is a complex area. It's quite fascinating, but it's also a very complex area, and that evidentially things do matter because it gives the opportunity to negotiate. Even if one doesn't negotiate for the full figure, the opportunity is there because you've got some evidence. And I think that's the important side of it at the moment. So thank you.
That. Yes. I like that answer. So I have a mover and a second. Everybody in favour of that? I don't see any objectors. Ms. Turvey, do you?
No, all looks good.
Okay, so we'll now then move to monitoring items, which is agenda item number 6, budgetary control. Councillor C.
Thank you, Leader. And I'd like to start by welcoming Neil Harris, who's on this conference call today. Neil is from our auditors, Ernst & Young. I'm going to do a brief introduction and then I'll pass over to Neil, who wants to cover a number of items with us. Okay, so, you know, I've brought reports to Cabinet since May that cover the implications of COVID for the Council. And just to remind you, we are internally tracking this on a weekly basis with regular updates by all councils in the county to the Gold Group and MPs. I can update you that to the end of October, we had total COVID-related pressures of 38.1 million. Against that, we have got 18.8 million of funding from the government. That's direct funding from the government, and ring-fence funding of 14.9 million. So that leaves a forecast COVID pressure of 4.4 million. I think I've said before, we're 86% funded against that pressure. the latest position is 88% funded. Our updated monitoring projection across all budgets show the net overspend position to the end of September of 4.3 million. And that's a 7 million improvement over the August position, and means timing differences between the COVID and monitoring returns are now converging despite being a month apart. Again, the main difference to the monitoring position is additional government funding. So the updated detailed analysis of under and overspending is contained in Appendix A. I think it's important to note that the Council has promptly delivered the additional funding that the government has provided to businesses. I think it's been vital piece of work. The best grant and discretionary grant schemes are now closed. However, over the past 6 months of the year, we've given business rates relief of nearly £41 million, over £32 million of specific grant funding for small, rural, retail, leisure and hospitality businesses, 0.181 million of grant assistance to reopen our city centre, hardship funding of 1.7 million to those on the local council tax support scheme, I think it was £150 each, and discretionary grants for businesses, and that's 1.6 million to 110 local businesses. Additional grants announced by the Prime Minister on the 31st of October for business amount to 6.9 million in total, and their delivery will be set out in next month's report. However, that scheme will require businesses to apply to the council. That's already online and available to businesses to do so. There will be a discretionary element that we'll bring forward shortly. The appendix also contains the present capital programme position. We still have only 12.7 million of spend for the year to date, which is substantially below plan. Reserve levels have now improved to show 2.5 million of usable reserves and a general fund balance of 6 million at the end of March 2021. And that's a 5.9 million improvement over last month's position. So Cabinet are asked to note the recommendations in this report, especially, it's vital, the requirement to continue to lobby for additional funding to minimise the effects of COVID-19 on Peterborough. And I'd now like to invite Neil Harris to cover off the auditor's position. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Seaton. And good morning, members of the Cabinet. So thank you for your invitation this morning. The reason why I thought it'd be important to come and have a briefing with you today is just to set out our response as the external auditors to Peterborough City Council. I'm the Council's external audit engagement lead, and I'm responsible for the performance of our audit of the Council's financial statements, but also have a responsibility under the National Audit Office's Code of Audit Practice to conclude on the Council's arrangements for securing economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources, which is our value for money conclusion. Now, I've had ongoing dialogue, as you would expect, throughout the course of our audit with the Chief Financial Officer and members of the Chief Financial Officer's finance team associated with the Council's financial position and the steps that the Council is taking to respond to the difficult sets of circumstances that you're facing. Now that has taken into account the position pre-COVID, which is the steps the Council sought to obtain a capitalisation direction from MHCLG, and obviously the steps that the Council has taken in response to the significant implications from the COVID-19 pandemic. And obviously I don't wish to rehearse for members of this committee the Council's financial position, how difficult your position is, what your outlook is for the next year and in the medium term. I think I just want to give you a view that for the members of this Cabinet, that I believe the Council have taken, and the officers, and as you as members, and where appropriate through lobbying with government, all the appropriate steps to highlight the significant financial challenges that the Council's facing, and has done so in a number of forums. Obviously, there's been regular public reporting of the Council's financial position. There's been regular dialogue with MHCLG. through the ongoing dialogue I've had with your Chief Financial Officer, that obviously culminated in a letter to MHCLG at the beginning of October, setting out the council's financial position, the future challenges, and at what risk the council were at in terms of its statutory responsibilities in terms of Section 114 and delivering a legal budget now and in the future. All of those steps are consistent with professional guidance that have been issued from SIPFA that do require perhaps more enhanced modifications now following COVID-19, that if a council was experiencing financial difficulties, it should explore alternative options before it had to exercise its Section 114 duties, and in doing so, to notify the external auditor. The fact I've been having regular dialogue with Peter Carpenter as your Chief Financial Officer meant that I was fully aware of the steps that the council was taking at the point that that letter was issued. Now, this is all important in the context of our audit responsibilities. So this evening, I'm presenting our audit results report to the Council's Audit Committee, which sets out the stage where we're at and concluding our audit of the Council's accounts. And we have a number of responsibilities as the Council's auditor. We obviously have to express an opinion on your financial statements and whether they represent a true and fair view of the Council's financial expression of its financial performance for the 1920 financial year. But we also have to express a conclusion on arrangements for securing value for money. We also have statutory responsibilities as well. Now, if you're well aware, over the last week, there's been further interventions in Croydon off the back of a public interest report that was issued by the external auditors. So auditors can wield significant powers if they are so concerned about the steps a local authority is taking to address either financial or governance concerns. Now, throughout the course of the audit, I've been considering our responsibilities. And just to put that into context, given the steps that the council's been taken and how open and transparent and visible it's been about the steps it's taking, I don't think it's appropriate at this stage for us to consider a report in the public interest, because all we'd be doing is drawing attention to items that are already in the public domain. A second statutory responsibility for an auditor is to issue a statutory recommendation where we're asking the authority to respond to something of such significance, or where we're finding significant gaps in what we think the authority is doing, and we are recommending steps are taken to address that. Now, given the work we've undertaken to date, we don't believe a statutory recommendation is appropriate, though I will come on to the work that we're finishing off on our audit and why that might still be an option that's open to me. But at this stage, statutory recommendation is not appropriate. Which then leads on to what's disclosed in your financial statements. We spend a lot of time with the finance team about how the council's disclosing in a full and transparent way its viability and liquidity position, looking at least 12 months forward from the date of our audit report. And that's effectively captured in your going concern disclosure that's been added to the back of your current draft of financial statements that's going to the audit committee later today. Now, this has been the product of a lot of ongoing dialogue with the council's finance team, because going concern can lead to a number of questions about what that means in the context of local government bodies that are presumed to continue to exist under the SIPFA code and under statute. However, the going concern disclosures in accordance with accounting standards do need to disclose appropriate detail and assumptions associated with the council's viability and liquidity position. So viability looks at the council's available to use reserves, looking at least 12 months from now to address its forecast budget gap and the scenarios that the council's putting in place to consider its forecast income and expenditure position. The liquidity position looks at available cash, short-term investment, and the level of forecast borrowing, and how the council's complying with its treasury management responsibilities, and whether it's proposing any unusual or spikes in activity that may cause a concern. Now, I'm pleased to say in the draft set of accounts that's going to audit committee this evening, there is a detailed going concern disclosure note that I believe reflects very accurately the position the council finds itself in, which is that the council is disclosing a material uncertainty associated with its viability position. And that's to say that if the council doesn't receive additional funding that it's asking for, there is a risk that the council may not be able to continue to provide the current levels of services that it's providing now. And I believe that's an appropriate disclosure. That's one that we're asking for consistently on all of our local authorities where we have concerns on a council's financial position. Every local authority audited by EY has been asked for detailed disclosures associated with viability and liquidity. And where we have any significant concerns, that can drive something called a material uncertainty. And that's been fully and openly disclosed. Just today, and it's happening right now, that disclosure and the audit work that we performed in response to it is going through a professional practice consultation. That consultation is to make sure that I've taken all the appropriate steps to review that disclosure and the assumptions and what that's likely to mean for our statutory audit report. And where I'm heading towards at the moment, and obviously this is subject to the outcome of our consultation exercise, is that I am moving towards still expressing that the council's accounts represent a true and fair view, so there wouldn't be a qualification to the council's accounts, but I would be drawing attention to the council's disclosures associated with going concern and material uncertainty, so which I think reflects perhaps proportionately a fair position on where we think the council is relative to how open and transparent they've been on their disclosures. So just to conclude what work I'm finishing off on at the moment. So to support the work we've undertaken on the going concern disclosure and assessment and looking at the council's value for money judgment, we've had specialists supporting us on the audit team that have reviewed the robustness of the council's forecasts in next year's budget and in the council's medium-term financial plan. We've undertaken 3 scenarios. We've undertaken a base case scenario that's testing the assumptions used in the council's budget and medium-term financial plan against our item club forecasts and current economic forecasts and socio-demographic trends that we're seeing right now. And then we've undertaken some additional stress testing of those numbers, considering a more severe recession that may take place, extended lockdowns, and a protracted economic recovery. And we've shared the output of that work with the council's finance officers so they can take a view about what we're saying. Our view is on the base case, and our view is that the base case scenario that's reflected in your medium-term financial plan is robust and based on sound assumptions. But we've also said what we think a worst-case scenario might look like based on our analysis. That work is concluded and is with the officers for comment. The second area that we're finishing is just reviewing the robustness of the savings and transformation plans and the arrangements that were put in place pre-COVID to put the council in the best position to achieve ongoing savings and transformation. We fully recognise that would have been hampered significantly in light of COVID-19 and the business resilience response that's been needed. But what we wanted to establish as your auditors is what were the arrangements the council were putting in place before COVID to secure ongoing savings and transformation. And that work is concluding before the end of the month. And that will inform our final value for money conclusion. And where I'm likely to be on the value for money conclusion is expressing that on many aspects of the council's services and decision making and governance, we're saying your arrangements are adequate. But we would be expressing an adverse opinion, again, just to recognise how pervasive your financial challenges are and how much that does provide a challenge for the council on the ongoing ability to make those medium to longer term decisions that are needed to secure your financial resilience in the future. Again, we'll be consulting on that with our professional practice team before we finish. We're still anticipating concluding our audit by the end of this month. I'll give an update to the audit committee later today on that front, and I'll stop now. And I hope this is a helpful update just to give the sense of what are the external auditors doing on associated with our audit of the council, but more particularly our response to the council's financial position. And I do want to thank the officers of the council for all the cooperation and assistance we've had throughout the audit. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today, Councillor Seaton and members of Cabinet. Obviously happy to take any questions.
You're on mute, Councillor Holditch.
Okay, thank you. Any questions to the auditor, members? Wayne.
Thank you very much. Neil, if I may give you a few things, some you may be able to answer, some you may not. So if you can do whatever you can do, would assist us. What I note that your work is not concluded, particularly on your value for money statement, but the administration and the council is being accused of financial mismanagement of the budget. Would you say that is true or not, in your opinion?
So based on our work to date, we've been reviewing the council's forecasts, both in terms of its ongoing budget and its medium-term financial plan, and the way in which it's responded to the challenges pre and post COVID. And I wouldn't reach that conclusion. What we are concluding on at the moment is a review of the council's arrangements pre-COVID around its savings and transformation programme. And obviously I need to see the output of that work the specialists are supporting me with before I reach a conclusion on that. But in terms of the way the council's made reasonable forecasts of its financial position now and over the medium term, we believe from the work that we've undertaken that those scenarios that have been set out in your budget and financial plans are reasonable ones. And we recognise the structural financial issues that the council's facing and the fact that it's made that request for additional funding.
Okay, I'm sorry to pressure because I've got a number of them, and it is because, as you outline yourself, as auditors, you have influence in terms of how people view us, how we're viewed in terms of the rest of within government, etc. So the council's position is indeed precarious. We've not made any or tried to hide that. But the other question is where we are today and the challenge that we face. We say this is not of our making. We say we've been prudent, we've been fiscally prudent, we've run things well, and it's nothing to do with the administration in terms of the decisions we've made that we've found ourselves short in terms of being able to satisfy the budget. Would you say that was true also?
I mean, obviously, as I say, I'm just concluding our work on the savings and transformation programs pre-COVID, because if that leads to any gaps in analysis or concerns on arrangements, that obviously would be something I'd need to reflect on. But I'll go back to my point on the actual budgeting the budget and scenario planning and the steps that the council's taken pre and post COVID associated with the capitalisation direction. And I've seen all the correspondence with MHCLG. I've seen the work that's ongoing at the moment to design, from the council's perspective, what a viable council looks like now and in the future. I would say those are all appropriate steps the council's taken. I would also say that the council's taken the right steps in line with the SIP for professional guidance as well. This is absolutely critical to me because the council wrote to MHCLG at the beginning of October, setting out its position, setting out that there may be a risk very soon that Section 114 powers may need to be exercised, and exploring alternatives before doing so. From my perspective, that's a highly appropriate step for the council to take. Had it not done so, then I think I would have been in a position as your external auditor to either issue a statutory recommendation or to issue a public interest report, which would then point to weaknesses in terms of financial decision making. So the fact the council took that step at what I believe to be the appropriate time means I think it would be harsh for me to criticise that in terms of the way the council's acted and behaved.
Okay. I'm listening to everything you say, which in effect, by the way, we made a conscious decision as a cabinet with our finance team led by Mr. Carpenter that we would be upfront about our position with government and MHCLG right from the get-go. So do you have any concerns then, from what you've just said, I guess not, about this administration's capability to run the authority led by our finance team? I don't expect you to speak politically, but I think what I just heard you say, you've got confidence in them and they've been doing the right thing so far.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one thing to look out for when we conclude our audit is more narrative commentary from us on some of the work that we've undertaken to not just review the robustness of the base forecast, but what we believe a stress tested position would be as well. You know, obviously we're on uncharted times at the moment, so we've been modelling more severe scenarios around a protracted economic recovery, ongoing implications of further lockdowns. and what that might mean for the council's financial position based on our forecasts. So I think just look out for that. That isn't pointing to any weakness in the way the council does things. It's just more our stress testing and what would the worst case scenario look like from our perspective. And I think for you as members of the Cabinet, once the council's officers and CMT have considered it, I think that would be useful for you to see, and we'd probably be reflecting that in our final audit results report and annual audit letter this year.
Okay, a couple of more points. So the penultimate one, is there anything so far during your work you think we could have done that perhaps we haven't? Or are you got any early indications of recommendations of things that we should do? And this in terms is to improve our financial position.
I'm keen to, before the end of the month, to get the output of our work on the savings transformation plans, because if there is any gaps in terms of governance arrangements or monitoring operational delivery of those savings, then clearly that's an important point I'd want to reflect on back to the officers and through you as Cabinet. The only other point I've raised with the officers over the last couple of weeks is, given we are now in a second lockdown and we are still seeing what the future economic trends are going to be post-COVID, I would strongly recommend that officers and through this Cabinet do ongoing scenario planning, build in a more stress testing into the numbers just to get a view of what the worst case scenario might be.
Okay, final question. So, and again, it's not meant to be a loaded question, but the fact is where you are at the moment, and I know you haven't included, but you gave some early indications about your value for money statement. In your opinion, because again, we are accused of being poorly run, do you think we're a very well run local authority? And I say that because I presume this is not the only local authority you do. So therefore you would have some knowledge. And if you just want to relate that to the value for money conclusion, that would be fine. But I tell people that we're a well-run local authority, and I genuinely believe that because we have a good set of people, and I think we have a good Cabinet that make the right decisions. So I'd just like to know your early view on that. If you have one, if it's too early, that's fine. But I would come back to you about it whenever the appropriate time is.
I mean, it's a shade early in the terms of the fact we haven't finalised our audit, but I've obviously been part of this audit for a year now. So I myself have seen how the council's operated, how it's taken decisions, the level of supporting information that's been provided to audit, both not just in terms of the more sensitive issue to do with your financial position, but just more generally in the performance of the audit. We obviously look at systems of internal control. We do look at key decisions that are taken on other matters, not just associated with your financial position. And I would say that we have been well supported in terms of the level of information that we've received from officers, not just in the finance team, but elsewhere, to support key decisions that the council's taken and to support key assertions that are support judgments that are included in the accounts, and also those things that do impact in and around value for money as well. So I would say that I'm seeing a very open, transparent and a council with a view of always wanting to be seen to be doing the right things. That's what I've certainly picked up throughout the course of the audit. The value for money conclusion that's expressed by the external auditor looks at your arrangements in place, and that considers not just financial resilience, but contract management aspects. Where there's been key decisions made in the year, have you undertaken appropriate due diligence? What's the effect? How effective are your risk management arrangements? So this always gets us into a little bit of choppy waters as external auditors, because we comment on arrangements. We don't always necessarily comment on outcomes, though clearly if arrangements aren't effective, then that would clearly have an impact on the outcomes in terms of value for money for the taxpayers in Peterborough. And I think going forward, the changes to the National Audit Office's Code of Practice will probably be more helpful to you as members, because you'll see more narrative commentary coming through from the external auditor commenting on value for money, rather than perhaps what we do now, which is more of a binary conclusion as to whether those arrangements are operating effectively or not.
The politician in me takes all your things in the round, everything you says, and concludes we are a well-run local authority. I shall leave it there, but that's everything I'm hearing from you. It seems to say that we're making the right decisions, we're doing the right things. We couldn't have done anything else really, and if we had, you would have picked it up. So I'm sticking with my line that whilst we all acknowledge the public concerns that are well documented, both from ourselves, yourself as the auditor, We are not poorly run. We are not financially mismanaging the council, and we are doing our very best in what are difficult circumstances. And I think, pre-COVID, as you're looking into that work as well, our team had got a plan in place in order to bring us to a balanced budget, which we've managed to set year on year. And we are where we are now. This is not anything to do with this administration. It's just the situation we find ourselves in. And if I don't hear any words to the contrary, or you're actually saying, no, that's not true, Councillor, then that's the line I'm going with, and I think we should all go with. Thank you very much, Mr. Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Farouk.
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, Neil. Neil, I've got sort of question in two small parts. You and your colleagues do obviously many other councils auditing and everything. First part of the question is, where do we stand in comparison to other councils? And then the second part of the question is, your colleagues must also probably work with MHCLG. And if then you know of a situation, your organisation knows of a situation, then are they able to then link up all the council's works with them to ensure that a fair funding or a fair system is in place where we can all have the right amount of funding to serve our residents and provide the services we do? Thank you.
Okay. So as you say, we audit a significant number of local authorities in EY, and we have as I described earlier, a process for being consistent in reviewing our value for money judgments and just what we expect by way of disclosures on going concern, looking at viability and liquidity. I would say when I look at my portfolio and the organisations we audit in EY, I would say just by virtue of the fact Peterborough have done the right things early on, you are one of the first few group of councils that have declared financial concerns, but I think you've done so in an appropriate way. I do myself have a concern that as you look into 21, 22 and beyond, given the ongoing impact of COVID-19, I don't think the numbers are going to be as small as being seen in the public domain at the moment. I think we can all point to councils that have publicly reported their positions. I just have an instinct that there will be more challenges facing local authorities over the next 12 months and beyond, but we certainly have a system in EY that's very clear about the ones that we're concerned about and what we're doing about it, and the ones that we can see on the horizon. And I know that the other audit suppliers do the same thing, as I've attended National Audit Office networks to share information and be clear about what all audit suppliers in the public sector are doing. In answer to your second question, I see that as being the next stages from the recent review that's been undertaken by Sir Tony Redmond into the sustainability of financial reporting and external audit in England. It's probably worth a read just to give an overview about what Sir Tony Redmond's recommending, but there's a lot of commentary in there about the robustness of Section 25 statements, the work that auditors do on financial resilience, and better linkages between all parts of the system around sharing of information. So MHCLG linking in with the auditors a bit more, the auditors linking in with their different networks so that information is better coordinated, so there is a better picture on that. I've certainly had a lot more link in with MHCLG recently, not just for Peterborough, but at other places as well. So that is starting to happen. So I think going forward, there's certainly a case to be made for better sharing of information and a better collective view on financial resilience across local authorities, drawing together observations that have been made by lots of different stakeholders, one of which being external audit, but I wouldn't say we're there yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I think you've stood up to that well. Can I thank you for all that? Can we go back to the budgetary control report now, please? And Councillor Ayres.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, just returning to the report itself, I was trying to work out what are the main differences in position compared to last month. So I'm not sure whether that's Councillor Seaton or Peter Carpenter could answer that question for me, please.
Peter?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Ayres. The main changes in position from the the previous month's position is the additional receipt of 5.7 million of grant, which brings the numbers down. There's been an assessment that not all capital receipts will be recouped at the moment because we're on ongoing negotiations on 3 or 4 at the moment. and the full year figures of Aragon show a pressure of 0.8 million. This is offset, however, by an additional £500,000 of additional income from the business rate pool at the moment. Those are the main changes.
Thank you, Councillor Hiller.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. General question, really, but we saw the announcement of the additional funding for businesses on the 31st of last month, I think. When will we actually see that money? Could anybody tell me that?
I can answer that. We got the money in our accounts, or 80% of it, on Friday. On the application scheme, we've got two schemes running at the moment, Councillor Higgin. The first one is for those businesses that are closed over the 4-week period. We have the application process open for that, and we have £2.8 million to allocate for that, and quite a fairly similar stringent application process to what we had with the previous BEES grants. As of this morning, we've already had 101 applications. With the discretionary scheme, which is just over £4 million, that needs to last until into the new financial year, so into around May time. We've got £4 million there. We've written out to our MPs, to Opportunities Peterborough, and to the bid, and are looking at others as well, to get people's views on what groups of businesses are being missed at the moment, or have been missed from present legislation. This first 6-month scheme we had, and the closed schemes, to formulate a discretionary scheme over the next week or so. We've asked people to come back by Wednesday to try and take that forward.
Thanks, Pete, for that. And I do have your reassurance that the application process is robust.
Yes, very much so.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walsh.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'd like to ask Peter the following. I mean, notwithstanding the reassurance that we have received from our auditors just now, which was very positive to hear, are you worried? Do you have any major concerns with regard to the capital programme?
Peter, you doing that?
Yeah, in terms of thank you, Leader. In terms of a capital programme, I am slightly concerned that we are well behind where we would usually be at this stage of the year. However, in terms of, and you remember, I do sign off every bit of expenditure over £1,000, and I've seen a lot of the highways capital schemes starting to generate momentum now. So those are running, and obviously there's a lot of match funding there with the combined authority. We obviously also have 3 or 4 major school schemes that are moving along now more. Obviously, they need to be done because we need to actually have the schools, all the changes up and running by September next year, when we have to open the classrooms. So I'm seeing momentum start to build. We probably will be not at the level we would have been at, but the momentum is building now. Of course, the issue will be if we have any other sort of social distancing, because all of our sites at the moment, obviously, we can't have the same amount of builders and technical people on site because we have to apply for social distancing regimes.
Thank you very much, Peter. So much is resting on a vaccine, isn't it? Thank you.
Councillor Bashir.
Thank you, Leader. My question is, do we expect the position to get worse and a further spike in COVID cases following the lockdown period?
What do you reckon, Peter?
In terms of where we are at the moment, we and quite a few councils did this, quite a number didn't. We looked at the full year in terms of COVID, and we've got about £14 million of our 38 million applies in terms of spend for the second half of the year, or it's around 14 to 16 million, so just under half. So we have assumed ongoing costs in the second half of the year. A lot will depend on where we come out of the 4-week period, if things go up or things go down. And as Councillor Walsh said earlier, when the vaccine is actually ready for being applied. What we've seen at the moment, though, is quite a lot of specific grants being applied through various sources for additional requirements. And I probably will see that going on. If there is a major spike, it will be a countrywide issue, and there'll probably be the need for another tranche of funding from MHCLG to help fund it. And also potentially also from the health sector, because a lot of it will affect things coming out of hospital, which affects directly Wendy's services.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor Bashir?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, Councillor Seaton, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you, Leader. I think just 2 points. I'd like to thank Neil for his time today and his honest answers. I must admit, I sometimes think that auditors are very political, and I suppose they have to be in their profession and what they give away. But my big take from what he said is open and transparent. I think the points put in by Councillor Fitzgerald were spot on. And I think the answers really do confirm we are open and transparent about what we do in this council. The second point I just remind people of is, you know, our COVID pressure this year is 88% funded, and we are still, what, 5 months from the end of the year. So I'm confident there will be further funds this year, and hopefully that will be 100% funded by the end of the year. But thank you, Cabinet, for your engagement today. I'm pleased to recommend the report to you.
Thank you. Happy to second that report. Everybody happy? Okay. Do I see any objections? Okay. Thank you very much. I think that is clear. Miss Turvey, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we've proved that. We're going now to item 7, which is the outcome of petitions. The recommendations are set out on page 57. Is it your wish that they accepted? You note them? I don't see any objections to that.
No, no objections, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think that concludes today's business. Am I correct? Thank you, members. I think that's been very constructive and important.